Welcome back. Have you heard of John Negroponte? If not, he's said to be the mastermind of what are known as death squads. The formula for these squads, which began in El Salvador in the 1980s, are now being seen in Iraq. So could Negroponte be behind the new paramilitary groups? Earlier, I posed that question to Michelle Chudovsky, the director of the Center for Research on Globalization.
Essentially, the term the Salvadorian option was coined when death squads were created in the early to mid-80s in El Salvador to fight the Frente Faribundo Martí de Liberación Nacional. It was the liberation movement, and ultimately that movement was defeated, and in the wake of their defeat, they integrated so-called civilian politics. Now, where Negroponte comes in is that he was ambassador to Honduras in the early 80s, and in fact from 81 to 85. And as ambassador in Tegucigalpa, he played a key role in supporting and supervising the so-called Nicaraguan Contra-mercenaries who were, in a sense, waging war against the Sandinistas in Nicaragua. But he was also involved in setting up the Honduran military death squads, which were operating with the support of Washington, and they were involved in numerous assassinations of opponents of what was, in fact, a U.S.-supported dictatorship in Honduras. Now, going forward, through Negroponte's career, he was then appointed ambassador, U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, and then upon retiring from that position in 2004, he took on the position of ambassador to Iraq, following the retirement of Paul Bremer. And it was at that moment that the Salvadoran option was actually even acknowledged in the mainstream media, in Newsweek, and also by U.S. policymakers, that it might be a good idea to undertake this kind of option. And essentially, in the context of Iraq, this signified supporting Kurdish as well as Shia militia, which would be involved in assassinations, particularly directed against the Sunni. But in fact, if we see the practice of this Salvadorian option in Iraq, it was directed against university professors, intellectuals, professionals, medical doctors, the whole basis of Iraqi society.
Michelle, it's an excellent point that you bring in here, because these death squads were synonymous in Latin America for taking out not only leaders of the resistance and opposition, but also members of clergy who supported them, sympathizers, doctors, dissidents, students. We're seeing that now in Iraq. What kind of role is Negroponte shifting what he implemented down in Latin America in the 1980s to Iraq? Because we are seeing symptoms of it, as you said. And if so, what's the point of these death squads? Why does the U.S. government need these things to implement its policies?
Well, first of all, I think what is instated there in Iraq is this notion that ultimately this is not a war of aggression and occupation, but the Iraqis are fighting among themselves. So how you create that illusion is that you support covertly. It's a CIA-led operation, and subsequently Negroponte was appointed the first national director of intelligence, a position which he held which he held during the Bush administration, and then he was appointed to the State Department as #2 man in the latter part of the Bush administration. But essentially, what the United States has to convey is, first of all, that this is a civil war, but they have to create a situation of havoc. So how do you do it? You create conditions where Iraqis are fighting one against the other, and you do it by these death squadrons. It's a diabolical operation. We are led to believe that these assassinations emanate from within Iraqi society, when in fact there are indications that that these terrorist attacks against civilians are in fact supported by the occupation forces.
Well, which is why I want to ask you something that's also part of this equation is civilians are being killed in these operations like they were massacred in Latin America during the reign of these death squads. So is the U.S. willing to risk its record on human rights with these death squads taking out civilians, men, women, and children to get its objectives through in Iraq?
Well, I mean, all this is sustained by camouflage. I mean, this is not something which is generally known and understood. We occasionally get news reports which confirm the role of the United States and allied forces, including Great Britain, including the United Kingdom, in supporting even the terrorists. There was a very high-profile case a few years ago when two British SAS special forces were caught with a car loaded full of bombs and dressed with Arab garb and mustache and so on in Basra, and they were driving towards the center of Basra at the height of a religious event, and they were arrested, quote unquote, by the Iraqi police and then liberated by British forces. So we have many circumstances, and we also have indications that these death squads are in fact the work of the occupation forces, and it's one among several dimensions of atrocities committed against the Iraqi people.
That was Michelle Chisodowski, the director of the Center for Research on Globalization.